people. Good evening, y'all. We're about an hour and a half into everybody's evening, and I'm going to be practicing for one of my English finals, wherein I'm asked to analyze several different texts from a variety of different perspectives and write an in-class essay. So I wanted to start off by talking about Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. That's the first book that we read for class. And let's see, when was this written? I believe he said it was written in 1937. So it's what you would call it, a bit of an older book. And yes, excuse me, it's an older book. Zora Neale Hurston was around during the time of the Harlem Renaissance, and it was really fascinating hearing about some of the other people who were around in a Harlem Renaissance, not Harlem residents. Hold on a second. My mom's texting me, and you always stop and watch your mother text you. Okay, do you see me? Okay. Harlem Renaissance. Yes. Yes, Brianna, I got the mail. Not technically today, but some mail was gotten during the course of the week. Okay. Harlem Renaissance. So she wrote this book. It takes place during the 1920s, and it follows the story of Janie, who's we meet her when she's like 13-ish years old, and we follow her life as she gets married, leaves her husband, gets married again. I will not be getting the mail today. Then she leaves that husband, marries for someone for the third time, and then more or less catastrophe strikes. Heavy on the more, light on the less. One thing that I noticed just across the different chapters is Hurston's style is very poetic. She wrote poetry and books, and you can really tell in the narratives. Sometimes it's a bit jarring going from, reading such beautiful lines like, I've got my notes here, give me a second. Really any narration. Like, this is from chapter 3. There are years that ask questions and years that answer. Janie had had no chance to know things, so she had to ask. Did marriage end the cosmic loneliness of the unmated? Did marriage compel love like the sun the day? Very beautiful, very lyrical, very poetic. And in sharp contrast to that, all of her dialogue is written in vernacular. So she writes out what we would describe as the Southern accent. So we're reading words like y'all and ain't and a whole heap of men seen the same thing you seen, but they got better sense than you. You ought to know you ain't no almond like that from no man like him, etc. My attempts at reading it out loud is dreadful, largely because I don't have the accent myself. So her style is very poetic, very lyrical. She writes in vernacular, kind of like Mark Twain. Then I'd like to talk a little bit more about one of the themes that I see very present in the book, and that's abuse. For reasons that I won't go into, I'm developing my awareness of recognizing abuse in literature. A lot of times, abuse that is there goes like unnoticed, unrecognized until much later. I'd like to present as Exhibit A, the Twilight series. I'd like to present as Exhibit B, 50 Shades of Grey. I'd like to present as Exhibit C, more or less the entire erotica section of the library. I think that will suffice as evidence. But Hurston's book especially just kind of glosses over these really horrifying moments we see. She describes how Janie's first husband, Logan, is literally 3 times her age. She gets married when she's 16 in an arranged marriage. Her grandmother arranges it. And Logan sort of leaves her emotionally. Like physically, he's still there, very present. But emotionally, he's nowhere to be found. He starts using her, or trying to use her, shall I say, as a workhorse. We see this in chapter 4, when Logan starts like prodding her to, why don't you go and plow in the fields now? In addition to doing all the work in the house that you already do, just go and do more of my work because we need to do more work. Like there's really no mention of love during the course of the marriage. I noticed there was a lot of food symbolism in this book. I love cooking, absolutely love it. Gordon Ramsay is goals, and food imagery really kind of sticks out to me. So in chapter 4, we're really beginning to appreciate the setup between Janie and Logan and the emotional disconnect that's there. And we read this description of food in my copy. It's on page 32. Logan was accusing her of her mama, her grandmama, and her feelings, and she couldn't do a thing about any of it. The sow belly in the pan needed turning. She flipped it over and shoved it back, a little cold water in the coffee pot to settle it, turned the hoe cake with a plate, and then made a little laugh. What was she losing so much time for? A feeling of sudden newness and change came over her, etc. So the sow belly, which is rather obviously the cut on the belly of the pig, if I remember this correctly from watching a butcher video, that's where bacon comes from. Nowadays, we consider that to be something enjoyable, but at the time, it was not a desirable piece of meat because of all the fat content, because you weren't really getting a whole lot of actual meat. So we've got an undesirable cut of meat. We've got the description of shoving it back, not placing it, laying it, tilting it back, just shoving it. We've got cold water in coffee, and we've got turning a hoe cake over with a plate. I know turning the hoe cake over with a plate is like, it's something that you would need to do if you were baking any type of cake, including a sweet cake, as I'll call it, meaning something with a lot of sugar and flour that's meant to be consumed as a dessert. And just, it describes it very sterilely, as if it's a hospital type of environment, not a loving home. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but just contextually, it kind of jumped out. I mean, it's called a hoe cake. I mean, I know that's what the thing is called, but also that's not a very appetizing thing to describe something. Hello, would you like hoe cakes for dinner? Instead of like pancakes or biscuits or literally any other synonym you could possibly use for the word hoe cake. It reads to me almost like it's okay. There's this scene in a Kitchen Nightmares episode. I know. All the Gordon Ramsay, but bear with me. When he's at some sort of southern restaurant, and they bring him out a piece of cornbread, and he's going back in the refrigerator, freezer, and digging around, doing his thing, and he takes these 2 plates that are sandwiching a piece of cornbread in the middle that's totally circular. He lifts it up and goes, "Look at that! It's just like a blank hoe cake, like a hockey puck." And he covers it up again and sticks it back on the shelf. He's not happy with it at all, and it's burnt. It doesn't look right at all. So that was the image that I had in my head when reading this, alongside the imagery of the sow belly, the cold water in the coffee pot, the flipping it over with a plate. Just, she's about 500% done with her first marriage at this point in time. This is then chapter 5 is just after she leaves her first husband, and she leaves with a man named Joe. Joe is described as a charming young man who manages to woo Janie away from her first husband. Not that that took a whole lot of work, and convinces her to go with him to this town that's built by Black people for Black people, and he wants to rise in prominence, and he wants Janie to come with him because he thinks that he can make a better life for her in this place. So they're going along. They arrive in the town. Joe decides that he's going to use some of his rather excessive amounts of money and acquire more land. He gets more land, builds up a store, a post office, more or less announces himself mayor, and Janie's new life begins, functioning as a mayor's wife and a store clerk simultaneously. Jody really uses her as an ornament. I spoke about food imagery in the last chapter. It continues here on, we're still in chapter 5. It's on my page 41. Before the store had a complete roof, Jody had canned goods piled on the floor and was selling so much he didn't have time to go off on his talking tours. She, Janie, had her first taste of presiding over it the day it was completed and finished. Jody told her to dress up and stand in the store all that evening. Everybody was coming, sort of fixed up, and he didn't mean for nobody else's wife to outrank her. She must look on herself as the bell cow. The other women were the gang. So she put on one of her store-bought dresses and went up the new-cut road all dressed in wine-colored red. Her silken ruffles rustled and muttered about her. So the description of the dress being wine-colored brings me to this idea that while we never really see Jody like explicitly wine and dine her, previously when she was married to Logan and Jody was kind of in that come with me like dating stage, he didn't really wine and dine her. They just showed up and talked. So now I think having the dress described as wine-colored red is indicative that he may not necessarily be wining and dining Janie, but he's using Janie as a means of wining and dining other people in town to make himself look better, more important. Like, look, I'm the man who bought more land. I'm the man who's the mayor. I'm the man who has a store. And look, my wife is the best arm candy out of any of y'all's wives. Whatever. So Janie, we're now in chapter 6. Janie's running the store, and we start to see Jody and Janie like develop more of a contentious relationship. The contention differs from the contention between Janie and Logan. Logan was absent. He was not all that interested in being emotionally present for Janie. She was just there to work, and that was that. Jody wants Janie to serve as an ornament. I said that before, but I'll say it again. He wants her to serve as an ornament. They argue over whether or not Janie can leave the store and go socialize with the other women. He doesn't want her to. He wants her to stay where he thinks her place is and watch the store, wait on customers, so on and so forth. She's very unhappy, and she accuses him of being no fun. He says, no, I'm just being responsible. And then she decides to shut up and not say anything more. And this really kind of kickstarts a phase in Janie's life when Jody walks all over her and she doesn't say anything back. She just shuts up and puts up and deals with it. We see there being a mule that was being mistreated, and Jody decides to buy the mule from somebody else in town. And Janie makes this speech to Jody in the store in front of everybody. I just saw it. Excuse me. It was the whole like a king, or here we go. Janie stood still while they all made comments. When it was done, she stood in front of Joe and said, Jody, that was a mighty fine thing for you to... I'm just going to read it in the normal, not the vernacular. Jody, that was a mighty fine thing for you to do. It ain't everybody would have thought of it, 'cause it ain't no everyday thought. Freeing that mule makes a mighty big man out of you, something like George Washington and Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. He had the whole United States to rule, so he freed the Negroes. You got a town, so you freed a mule. You have to have power to free things, and that makes you like a king or something. So Janie is unusually eloquent. At this point in time in her life, she's like 20, 22-ish. And Jody is older, more experienced. I'm not too terribly sure as to how much older he is. It could be anywhere from like 5 to, I don't know, 500 years, but he's older. Significantly enough for it to mean that he doesn't treat Janie with the same amount of respect that he should. We see more more food symbolism on page 66 when there's a dialogue between Sam Watson, Liege Moss, and Jody. I'm not too sure who's speaking. They caught him over there in Egypt. Seemed like he used to hang around there and eat up the pharaoh's tombstones. They have pictures of him doing it. Nature is high in the varmint like that. Nature and salt. That's what makes up strong man like Big John the Conqueror. He was a man with salt in him. He could give a flavor to anything. So I've never really described somebody as having a flavor. I've said something like, so-and-so's presence is an acquired taste, or enjoying the same thing is definitely an acquired taste. But I use the phrase acquired taste. I don't say salt, and I don't say flavor. That just seems really weird to say in description of somebody else. So that stuck out to me as another example of food imagery. We're not too sure about who he's talking about in real life. We just know that he's there and doing his thing. Then right away on the next page, there's a description of young women who are all dressed up, walking down Main Street in the town. And you'll probably be able to find the food imagery because it's not that hidden. It's just, I don't know if anybody else has noticed it. When I was pointed out in class, not too many people were saying, oh yeah, I noticed that too. Mostly I got weird looks like. But here comes Bootsy and Teddy and Big Omen down the street, making out they are pretty by the way they walk. They have that fresh, new taste about them like young mustard greens in the spring. And the young men on the porch are just bound to tell them all about it and buy them some treats. Her hair is not what you might call straight. It's Negro hair, but it's got kind of a white flavor, like the piece of string out of a ham. It's not ham at all, but it's been around ham and got the flavor. It was spread down thick and heavy over her shoulders and looked just right under a big white hat. Like, I don't understand why she would describe somebody's hair as string that's been around a piece of ham. That definitely is not complimentary at all. But I feel like in that case, Hurston is trying to communicate that Janie doesn't really like these two characters, or this one in particular that she's describing. It's just the character is there and she's acknowledging, yeah, okay, her hair looks good under the hat, but let me tell you, it looks like a piece of string around ham. Like, Brianna, I'm pretty sure you're watching this. I've given you some really weird compliments, but I don't think I've ever told you that, you know what your hair reminds me of? String that's been around a ham. It has that ham flavor. I've not said that to you, but I can remember. I feel like I would remember if I said something like that to you, but I also feel like I forget a lot. So, 6 in one, half a dozen in the other. Then further on, we have a rather extended scene wherein a young man was trying to buy the woman with the hamstring hair, a pickled pig's foot. Apparently, it's considered a treat, a delicacy. I don't know why you would want to consume that, but who am I to argue? There was a big whoop to do over buying it, having to go back into the back of the stockroom, drag the barrel up, so on and so forth. And Janie was commenting on how much she wanted Jody to be there to do all the heavy lifting for her. She didn't say that to the customers, but she said it narratively, if that makes any sense. So it makes me wonder, like, what is she trying to say with that? Is she trying to say that she wishes she and Jody were as much in love as this new young couple is? Or is she trying to say that this new young couple just needs to wait and life is going to teach them that love doesn't really come into play at all, which is what her paradigm is at this point in time? I'm not sure. Then farther down, we see the first description of we see the first description of non-sexual physical abuse, if that makes any sense. I identify what her first husband does as statutory rape because she was 16 when she got married, and you're 16 sleeping with like a 45, 48-year-old man. That's not the sign of someone who's terribly hinged on either part, but especially on the man's part. So I define that as statutory rape, even though the book doesn't. And contextually, Hurston doesn't seem to identify it as a problem, but also she doesn't really identify any of the rest of abuse explicitly as a problem. She just kind of says it and moves on. She doesn't say, and this was a problem. This was an issue. This should not be a thing. Janie doesn't really go through that thinking on her own. She just comes to the conclusion that she's not happy with her life. So on page 71, we're still in chapter 6. Janie is describing the problem that prompted Jody to slap her in the face. She was 24 and 7 years married when she knew. She found out one day when he slapped her in the face in the kitchen. It happened over one of the dinners that chasten all women sometimes. They plan and they fix and they do, and then some kitchen-dwelling fiend slips a scorchy, soggy, tasteless mess into their pots and pans. Janie was a good cook, and Joe had looked forward to his dinner as a refuge from other things. So when the bread didn't rise and the fish wasn't quite done at the bone and the rice was scorched, he slapped Janie until she had a raining sun on her ears and told her about her brains before he stalked on back to the store. This is not the sign of a well-hinged man. This is not the sign of a well-hinged partner that you want to be with you. This is a sign that you need to leave. I think in this case, the food imagery here is used as an analogy to identify that, just like everything else in Janie's life, namely emotional connections, her sense of self-agency is not really there anymore, hasn't really been able to develop, is no longer a thing. Now we see that her cooking skills have kind of gone by the wayside too. In one of the commercials for Masterclass, there was some chef who was not Gordon Ramsay, but was an American chef. He has Michelin stars, is very well decorated. And he said, cooks cook because they want to nourish people. So applying that idea to this, I think it's terribly indicative that Janie is no longer feeling the same kind of motivation she was before to nourish people. She's just doing it because she thinks it's what she should be doing, not because she wants to build that kind of emotional connection with her husband. Clearly, he's not all that interested in, I don't know, even treating her with common decency. He slaps her until she has a ringing sound in her ears. Um, I don't know how many times he actually slaps her, but the number of times is irrelevant. Once is too many, and once is unacceptable. That's the end of it. Um, but she decides to stay in the relationship longer. She had an inside and an outside now, and suddenly she knew how not to mix them. She's just 500% done with everything. Janie then just kind of she exists in the state where she's not really sad, she's not really happy, she's just numb. Jody starts cheating on her. He kicks Janie out of the house. He starts belittling her in front of everybody, because he himself is no longer the thin and fit man he was. He's put on weight, he has a belly, so on and so forth, and he tears Janie down about it. She doesn't get mad at him for this, she just pities him, and I feel like that's even worse than anger. Anger, at least, is recognizing somebody as a threat or as dangerous. Pitying somebody is like, you're so pathetic, you can't even intimidate me anymore. You're not dangerous. You're pathetic at this point. It's kind of emasculating, I guess, that she's pitying him, but also he's emasculated himself by treating her like that. It's not the sign of a real man, it's the sign of somebody who needs therapy. Excuse me. Why don't you put that in your tea and sip it, Jody? So Janie goes to see him, and throughout their relationship, she's put up with stuff. Now he's on his deathbed, and now she confronts him. I'm going to actually refer to the book for this instead of just the part that I copied down, because this is a turning point for Janie. She's really standing up for herself, and she only does it once, but once is all it takes. In all fairness, though, Jody is on his deathbed, so physically he's not too terribly intimidating anymore. I'm going to start reading on page 85, and I'm going to read basically till the end of the chapter. He, Jody, was lying on his side facing the door like he was expecting somebody or something. A sort of changing look on his face, weak-looking but sharp-pointed about the eyes. Through the thin counterpane, she could see what was left of his belly huddled before him on the bed like some helpless thing seeking shelter. The half-washed bedclothes hurt her pride for Jody. He had always been so clean. "What you doing in here, Janie?" "Come to see about you and how you were making out." He gave a deep growling sound like a hog lying down in the swamp and trying to drive off disturbance. That's not a very flattering way to describe somebody. Does he deserve flattery? No, absolutely not. But let's go back to the whole ham analogy. Is there something like with Hurston and pigs? There's a lot of swine descriptions. Anyway, he gave a deep growling sound like a hog lying down in the swamp and trying to drive off disturbance. "I come in here to get shut to you? Something of you. But look like it isn't doing me any good. Go on out. I need to rest." "No, Jody. I come in here to talk with you, and I'm going to do it for both our sakes. I'm talking." He gave another ground grumble and eased over on his back. "Jody, maybe I ain't been such a good wife to you, but Jody, that's 'cause you ain't got the right feeling for nobody. You ought to have some sympathy about yourself. You're not a hog." "But Jody, I meant to be really nice. Much as I done for you, holding me up to scorn. No sympathy." "No, Jody, it wasn't because I didn't have no sympathy. I had a lavish for that." I think that means she had a lot of it. "I just didn't ever get no chance to use none of it. You wouldn't let me." "That's right. Blame everything on me. I wouldn't let you show no feeling. When, Janie, that's all I ever wanted or desired. Now you come blaming me." It's not that, Jody. I'm not here to blame nobody. I'm just trying to make you know what kind of person I am before it's too late. Too late? He whispered. His eyes buckled in a vacant-mouthed horror, and she saw the awful surprise in his face and answered it. Yes, Jody, I don't care what multiplied cockroach told you to give your money. You gotta die, and you can't live. This is her first time standing up for herself. It's right after, yes, I'm a really compassionate person. She says, you have to die. You can't live anymore. She doesn't kill him, but my goodness, is that a fantastic last line. A deep sob came onto Jody's weak frame. It was like beating a bass drum in a henhouse. Then it rose high, like pulling in a trombone. Janie, Janie, don't tell me I gotta die, and I ain't used to thinking about it. It ain't really no need of you dying, Jody, if you had the doctor, but it doesn't do any good bringing that up now. That's just what I want you to say, Jody. You wouldn't listen. You lived with me for 20 years, and you don't half know me at all. And you could have, but you were so busy worshipping the works of your own hands and cuffing folks around in their minds so you didn't see a whole heap of things you could have. Leave here, Janie. Don't come here. I know you wasn't going to listen to me. You change everything, but knowing doesn't change you, not even death. But I ain't going out of here, and I ain't going to hush. Now, you gonna listen to me one time before you die. Have your way all your life. Trample and mash down, and then die rather than to let yourself hear about it. Listen, Jody, you ain't the Jody I run off down the road with. You're what's left after he died. I run off to keep house with you in a wonderful way, but you wasn't satisfied with me the way I was. Nah, my own mind had to be squeezed and crowded out to make room for yours in me. Shut up! I wish thunder and lightning would kill you. I know it. And now you got to die to find out that you got to pacify somebody besides yourself if you wants any love and any sympathy in this world. You ain't try to pacify nobody but yourself, too busy listening to your own big voice. All this tearing down talk, Jody whispered with sweat globules forming all over his face and arms. Get out of here. All this bowing down, this disobedience under your voice, that ain't what I rushed off down the road to find out about you. A sound of strife in Jody's throat, and his eyes stared unwillingly into a corner of the room. Then Janie knew the futile fight was not with her. The icy sword of the square-toed one had cut off his breath and left his hands in a pose of agonizing protest. Janie gave him peace on his breast, then she studied his face for a long time. So even though Jody's on his deathbed, she goes and confronts him. She tells him, you're gonna die. You can't live anymore. Enough is enough. And she tells him that he could have done better, but that he was manipulative and controlling. He had to squeeze her mind out to make room for his. I've said it before, I'll say it again. That's not the sign of a well-hinged person. A real hinged leader, like Jody claims to be, wouldn't do that sort of thing to Janie at all. He wouldn't be threatened by her own self-agency. He would respect it, enjoy it, learn something from her. Like, what did he really gain by making her miserable? He got to manipulate somebody to stay with him and do what he wanted. Like, yeah, congratulations, but you didn't actually do any long-lasting good for anybody. You didn't make yourself a better person. You didn't make Janie a better person. Janie kind of uses this, at least in this small section of the book. It kind of changes later on, but in this section, she uses his mistreatment of her as a phoenix moment. She comes back stronger than ever. I've in my prowlings, shall we say, on Pinterest, I've read again and again how people, especially young women, are upset by stories insisting on using sexual assaults, violence, etc., all perpetrated against women for the purpose of furthering plot or to use as a phoenix moment. And like, can't we come up with anything else? Yeah, they probably can, but I feel like this works really well in this story because having something in there for the purpose of it being a Phoenix moment is not good writing. But showing that you can use something like this as a Phoenix moment is good writing. Kim Stanley Johnson, a science fiction author who writes about climate change, says, fiction stories are the way we arrange our knowledge of the world into a narrative form to tell ourselves how to behave in certain situations. So, with all of the mistreatment that goes on in Their Eyes Were Watching God, Janie uses certain things as little Phoenix moments. And she uses things as certain little Phoenix moments, yes. I'm going to move on. I'm probably going to come back to this idea afterwards because I want to talk about her third husband, but I'm not going to be able to do that until I carry on and actually talk about her third husband. So Janie lives single for a while after Jody's funeral. I love the way chapter 9 begins. Janie starched and ironed her face and came set in the funeral behind her veil. Like, she starched and ironed her face. You obviously don't do that. I've heard of putting on your face, not of starching and ironing it, but it seems to me like, because earlier we were reading descriptions of Jody being older, and the young girl was gone, but a handsome woman had taken Janie's place. She starched and ironed her face, changed into what she thought people would want to see. Like, it's like we're literally reading the fake it till you make it, but in narrative form, and way better than just that. So in chapter 10, we see Janie meeting somebody new. He goes by the name of Tea Cake, but his real name is Virgible Woods. It's quite a name, but he goes by the name of Tea Cake. I'm not so sure that's an improvement as much as it is trading one type of vegetation for a pastry, but whatever. He starts to spend time with Janie, teach her how to play checkers, and she's really happy that somebody is finally starting to pay attention to her. So she gets all her money together, gets dressed up in a fancy dress, and leaves with him. They go someplace. When I don't remember what city in particular they go to, but it's a different city. He gets a hotel room for them, and then he leaves her for like a week, and Janie's money is gone. Like, she had put her money in a little pouch, and she had pinned it to her dress. And then one morning, after they're in the hotel room, the dress is still there, but the money's gone. And and Tea Cake has a gambling problem. So this is not a good setup at all. How could I not have written that down? Yes. They get married in Jacksonville. That's where they go to. So they leave Eatonville, which is where Jody had the store and was acting mayor. They go to Jacksonville. They get married. He gets the hotel room, and he leaves with $200, leaves her alone, and comes back and just says, "Oh, I spent it on a chicken and macaroni dinner for the railroad workers who are my friends." Like, What kind of a menu was that? Chicken and macaroni? Not even macaroni and cheese, just chicken and macaroni. And $200 worth in that economy? Were you feeding a whole platoon? So, page 118 is when we see the description of Janie realizing that her money's gone. By now we're in chapter 13. When she heard the 12 o'clock whistle, she decided to get up and dress. That was when she found out her $200 was gone. There was a little cloth purse with a safety pin on the chair beneath her clothes. You dare bring him chicken fried steak? No! Not chicken fried steak. It's not chicken fried steak. It's chicken and macaroni. It's better than chicken fried steak, but only slightly. And barely. When she heard the 12 o'clock whistle, she decided to get up and dress. That was when she found out her $200 was gone. There was a little cloth purse with a safety pin on the chair beneath her clothes, and the money just wasn't nowhere in the room. She knew from the beginning that the money wasn't any place she knew of if it wasn't in that little pocketbook pinned to her pink silk vest. But the exercise of searching the room kept her busy, and that was good for her to keep moving, even though she wasn't doing anything but turning around in her tracks. So, clearly, very clearly, this is an indication that the guy that she's with just stole her money and ran away. Then Hurston tells us the story of somebody that Janie knew from Eatonville who had gotten married and all done up, and she left, and she was off to get married. The town had seen her limp off. The undersized high heel slippers were punishing her tired feet that looked like bunions all over. Her body squeezed and crowded into a tight corset that shoved her middle up under her chin. She had gone off laughing and sure as Janie had been. Then we get this very horrifying description of 2 weeks later, this woman coming back, and all of her finery was gone. She was old and tired and unlaughing and absolutely miserable. She ended up having to go to her family, and they sent her back to Eatonville, which is where she needed it to be. And we read this description about, and this is not Janie, this is the woman that Janie knows. She had waited all her life for something, and it had killed her when it found her. That's a harrowing glimpse of reality. And this woman that Janie knows, the guy that she left with dated her for 2 years or so before they left, and convinced her to sell her house and rent a room, and then left her 2 days later. It's a really long con, and it seems like he didn't really gain anything from it. It was just no reason but cruelty that prompted that motive, and that's a terrible thing to do to somebody. Brianna, as you're commenting, can you please possibly comment on the audio quality? Because I don't know how clearly you can hear me. I don't know how loud you can hear me. I'm supposed to have 1 second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 6 little white dots that tell me how loud I am, and I never get past the first one being lit, so I don't know if you can hear me well at all. Just let me know. All right, she had waited all her life for something, and it had killed her when it found her. Whew. Man. So we read that on page 120. Then page 124. Just before the party wore out. Just before day the party wore out, so Tea Cake hurried on back to his new wife. he had found out how rich people feel, and he had a fine guitar and $12 left in his pocket, and all he needed now was a great big old hug and kiss from Janie. So he gets home, and they're talking, and he says to her, "That's all I want to know. From now on, you're my wife and woman, and everything else in the world I need." So he's putting the responsibility of supporting him, holding himself together, holding his whole identity on Janie. No amount of self-sufficiency. My phone keeps buzzing. I'm going to get it quick. No amount of self-sufficiency there, no amount of self-agency whatsoever. Well, you do whatever it is you gotta do, Mom. I'm just gonna be here. Surely, leave me alone. You can probably watch it again later, though I don't know if you'd want to sit through like 45-ish minutes of me going on and on. But here we go. He basically tells her that he's going to define her and use her to define him. This is what we call a terrible idea, also a codependent relationship. There's 3 different types of dependence. There's independence, where you don't need anybody. There's interdependence, where you're fairly self-sufficient, you rely on people for some things. People are self-sufficient, rely on you for other things. That's a good example of like the market system that we have, where we can cook, but we rely on somebody else to provide the food for us to cook. So we go to the store and buy it. That's interdependent. Then the third type is codependence, where y'all really need to get out of there and get help. You're not in a good frame of mind. There's a series and a half of problems. You just need to stop and enjoy the great and wonderful not, and never again. So Tea Cake is turning their relationship from being interdependent into being codependent, and this is not a good situation for Janie again. Then, life goes on. They move to a new town, and Tea Cake gets a job working for the railroad and working in the fields picking produce. Supposed to be a very good job. This woman befriends Janie and is trying to get her brother to go out with Janie. And this other woman called Nunky starts to flirt with Tea Cake when they're out in the fields together doing their thing. And every so often Janie goes out to the field. She sees Nunky flirting. So she has her own eyewitness testimony, more or less, to say that, yeah, this is a thing. It's not ideal. It wasn't long before Tea Cake found her there and tried to talk. She cut him short with a blow, and they fought from one room to the other, Janie trying to beat him, and Tea Cake kept holding her wrists and whatever he could do to keep her from going too far. So this right here is a warning sign. I mean, obviously there were warning signs well before we got to this point, but we're here now. Just in general, Janie trying to beat Tea Cake is probably something that should have happened a long time ago, but not so much in the actual beating him up, more in the sense of, I'm leaving you and taking my money with me. Thank you very much. This just kind of, so this, I guess you could say, it serves as a catalyst in chapter 15 to turn their relationship into being more physically violent. Because then in chapter 17, Janie's friend, who's trying to get her to date the brother, is like, oh, my brother's coming. I'll introduce you to him. It'll be great. So then we see this scenario happen on page 147 to 148. I'm just going to read this all the way through. A great deal of the old crowd were back, but there were lots of new ones too. Some of these men made passes at Janie, and women who didn't know took out after Tea Cake. Didn't take them too long to be put right, however. Still in all, jealousies rose now and then on both sides. When Mrs. Turner's brother came and she brought him over to be introduced, Tea Cake had a brainstorm. Before the week was over, he had whipped Janey. Not because her behavior justified his jealousy, damn straight, but it relieved that awful fear inside him. Being able to whip her reassured him in possession. It reassured him in possession. You don't own anybody. No brutal beating at all. Like, that makes it better. He just slapped her around a bit to show he was boss. Yeah, that's because you feel threatened and insecure and you don't actually have the abilities to ascend the competent dominance hierarchy. Everybody talked about it next day in the fields. It sort of roused envy. Envy in both men and women. The way he petted and pampered her as if those 2 or 3 face slaps had nearly killed her made the women see visions. And the helpless way she hung on him made the men dream dreams. This is an absolutely, first of all, it's a very well written scene. But second of all, it's horrifying. And Hurston is just moving on like this isn't awful. Like, what? So, an abusive cycle is being set up here. We see the initial abuse. So, whenever something gets physically violent or the 2 parties fight. Then there's the apology stage where he pampers and pets her. He, as if those 2 or 3 face slaps had nearly killed her. He's being overly apologetic. This is just to serve as a means to convince her to stay with him and, oh, it'll never happen again. Promises, promises, promises. And, just give it a couple of weeks. And eventually the cycle bottoms out. Like, you're no longer in that honeymoon stage and things are starting to escalate. There's you're upsetting me, so I'm going to take it out on you because I can't handle my own emotions and I can't communicate my needs, my feelings like a responsible, mature, cohesive adult. Instead, I'm just going to lash out like a child and I'm going to beat you. And then this repeats ad nauseum. So the fact that it made the women see visions and the helpless way she hung on him made the men dream dreams seemed like there are plenty of other people in this community who are also in like really abusive relationships, but they're not necessarily seeing it themselves. They're not necessarily concerned about it, and all in all, they see Janie's relationship with Tea Cake as desirable because he gets to beat her up, she gets pampered, and she still loves him. Like, no, you're just idealizing the fact that you watch somebody be abused and stay with their abuser. Like, let's just clear that up right away. So, this part made me so mad. Like, I'm not already worked up. We're still on page 147 to 148, still in chapter 17. Tea Cake, you sure is a lucky man, Soptobottom told him, one of Tea Cake's friends. A person can see every place you hit her. I bet she never raised a hand to hit you back neither. Take some of these old rusty black women and they would fight you all night long and next day nobody couldn't tell you ever hit 'em. That's the reason I done quit beating my woman. Oh, so you stopped beating her because she fought back? And because you didn't get to see marks? Not because you realized you were being... I don't want to swear here, but you can think of a word. Insert swear word of choice here, generally a derogatory term. That's not why you decided to quit beating her? Not because you decided to be a better person, but because you couldn't see bruises? You couldn't see marks? That's why you decided to stop? Yeah, great show of responsibility there. Lord, I wouldn't love to whip tender woman like Janie. I bet she doesn't even holler. She just cries. And Tea Cake, he's literally... Soptobottom, Tea Cake's friend, is literally getting off here on the helplessness that Janie's in when Tea Cake beats her. She needs to leave a long time ago. Running. But she doesn't. Then Soptobottom complains about how his wife would knock out his teeth, and she would wade through solid rock up to her hip pockets. I'm not too sure what that means, but it sounds like she wouldn't let him do whatever she wanted. Then Teague responds, "My Janie is a high-time woman and used to things. I didn't get her out of the middle of the road. I got her out of a big, fine house. Right now she got money enough to bank up for these zigaboos and give them away. Hush your mouth, and she down here on the muck like anybody else. Janie is wherever I want to be. That's the kind of wife she is, and I love her for it. I wouldn't be knocking her around. I didn't want to whip her last night, but old Miss Turner done sent for her brother to come to bait Janie and take her away from me. I didn't whip Janie because she done nothing. I beat her to show them Turners who is boss." You know what? You're absolutely right. Nothing screams, "I'm completely confident in my own masculinity and am unthreatened by somebody else's self-agency," like beating your wife on the off chance she might decide to run away with somebody after you've already been manipulating her. Like, great show of masculinity there. You are an inspiration to us all. I said in the kitchen one day and heard the woman tell my wife I'm too black for her. She doesn't see how Janie can stand me. Miss Turner is Janie's friend with the brother and is a racist. Miss Turner is black but is racist against black people. I don't know why. I don't know how that could be a thing, but here we are. She doesn't see how Janie can stand me. Yeah, frankly, I don't see that either. But it's not for racist reasons. It's because you're an ass. Sorry, Mom. But he is. So I didn't copy down this scene, but shortly after page 148, we see that there's this very extended scene when Tea Cake is in a restaurant and two people come in and start fighting, and then food starts flying. People are fist fighting. Tables get broken. Like, it's quite a dramatic scene. Basically, it's a bar fight. And Miss Turner is the woman who runs this restaurant / hotel. It's one of those old type places where the restaurant is on the bottom floor, the hotel is up higher, like on the second floor. So Miss Turner's husband, she goes by Miss Turner even though she's married. I don't know why. He just kind of sits there when the fighting is going on. He doesn't try to stop it. And Tea Cake is the one who tries to stop it. He ends up getting hurt, and Miss Turner basically throws him out. Like, that's not terribly polite considering that your restaurant was being destroyed and he stopped it. But, you know, whatever. Then chapter 18, everybody starts leaving where they are. Native Americans leave, other people leave, animals are leaving. There's hurricane, there's flooding. Janie and Tea Cake end up caught in this mess. Page 160 in my copy, chapter 18 is where we get the title of the book from. The wind came back with triple fury and put out the light for the last time. They sat in company with the others in other shanties, their eyes straining against crude walls in their souls, asking if he, meaning God, meant to measure their puny might against his. They seemed to be staring at the dark, but their eyes were watching God. I still haven't figured out why that became the title of the book. Unless it's supposed to... Unless the dark is supposed to be like all the stuff that Janie goes through. So chapter 19, Tea Cake, like, this is kind of a long-ish chapter, but still like short compared to the other ones. Tea Cake is forced at gunpoint to bury dead bodies found. They bury the bodies of the white people that they find. When they find the bodies of black people, they just bury them straight in the dirt. They don't put them in a coffin, or they just stack them up on the side of the road. They don't really treat them with respect. Tea Cake's health deteriorates, and he begins to show like symptoms of rabies. The doctor comes and pulls Janie aside and tells her that he thinks that the dog that bit Tea Cake was rabid. So Tea Cake's not doing so hot. Not that that's a great tragedy, but, you know. he's not doing so hot. Tea Cake's health deteriorates. He starts like hallucinating, and Janie waits until he leaves to go to the restroom, which meant like not just leaving the room where he was sleeping in because he was bedridden, but also like leaving the house to go to the outhouse. It's called an outhouse, for heaven's sake. She goes into the bedroom and she finds that he has hidden a pistol underneath his pillow, and it's one of the one. It's a type of pistol where there's like 6 little spots for bullets, and she takes out 3 bullets. He's got all 6 chambers loaded. She only takes out half of the bullets. You give herself time to react. So, Tea Cake comes back. He accuses Janie of treating him wrongly, and he's holding the pistol when he does it. And he points at her, and he pulls the trigger once, twice, and then he pulls it a 3rd time. When he pulls the trigger for the 3rd time, Janie's got the rifle pointed at him and fires first, and she shoots him and he dies. Same day, she's arrested, put on trial, found innocent, and all the people that she thought were her friends came to her trial, but they weren't there to support her. They were there because they didn't like her anymore because she killed Tea Cake. What a tragedy that was. Janie gives Tea Cake a royal burial afterwards. She like pulls out all the stops, and she's very upset about his death. I'd like to point out this interesting part on page 184, when this takes place when Tea Cake is pointing the gun at her and pulling, and she's got the rifle pointed at him. The fiend in him must kill, and Janie was the only living thing he saw. I feel like that accurately describes like something that could go on in somebody's mind when they're deciding that domestic violence is a really good idea to do that day. The fiend in him must kill, and Janie was the only living thing he saw. Like, there are so many other options to do with your life, but also Tea Cake was rabid. Am I making excuses for him? No, but we must acknowledge that he was more out of his mind than usual. Tea Cake literally tries to kill Janie when he's rabid, and we've already seen that there's this pattern that's set up with them of domestic abuse. I talked about the cycle that they go through. I showed at great length problematic moments in their relationship, when he steals her money, when Janie tries to beat him, when he actually does beat her to show who's boss. And in any domestic violence cycle, the behavior is cyclical, yes, but every time you get to the top of the cycle, when the violent act happens, the violence itself escalates. So like the first time, he only slaps her a couple of times. The next time, he slaps her harder and more. By the 3rd time, he's using a belt to hit her with, so on and so forth. This is common, not just like in the book common, but also in like real life relationships where the violence escalates. And yes, oh boy. The violence escalates, and the final step is killing the victim, is killing the person that you're abusing. This has happened again and again and again. We see that nowadays in American society, where I'm going to look up the statistic quick because I want to be sure that I'm saying it right. Okay. How often women die from domestic violence in U.S. calendar year? Percent of women killed. Okay, I'm going to start with one from The Atlantic. New CDC report suggests that domestic violence is a major cause of death from women. Oh, okay. It only analyzed the murders of women in 18 states. from 2003 to 2014. It noted that Black people are disproportionately at risk for being in these violent situations. Let me check out the one that's NBC News. Well, yeah. Okay. Just so this article was published in 2017 and says that nearly 3 women every day in the U.S. are killed by domestic violence. So that's what is 3 times 365? That's 900 plus 180 plus 15. So that's 1,995 women a year. 1,995 women a year. Too many. One is too many. Violence is never acceptable in a relationship. Never. But for heaven's sake, 3 women a day being killed in these domestic violence situations? So much wrong with this. So chapter 20 is the very last section of the book, and Janie just goes back to her house. She sits alone. She needs time to herself. She's told her entire story to her friend, like the only person who's talked to her since she came back. I'm going to read some of the ending out loud because it's listed as one of the most profound endings, one of the best endings, etc., and so forth in classical literature. So I want to point that out. Where is... Okay. So, they, meaning other citizens in the town where Janie lived with Jody in the big house. Yeah, very funny, Brianna. I'm finding the spot, okay? They begged Janie to stay on with them, and she had stayed a few weeks to keep them from feeling bad. But the monk meant tea cake, and tea cake wasn't there. So it was just a great expanse of black mud. She had given away everything in their little house except a package of garden seed that tea cake had bought to plant. The planting never got done because he had been waiting for the right time of the moon when his sickness overtook him. The seeds reminded Janie of tea cake more than anything else because he was planting things. Yeah, like gaslighting, self-doubt, among other plenty lovely things. She had noticed them on the kitchen shelf when she came home from the funeral and put them in her breast pocket. Now she was home, she meant to plant them for remembrance. So now she's back in her house in Eatonville where she and Jody had run the store. Janie stirred her strong feet in a pan of water. You can't have a pile of water. In a pan of water. The tiredness was gone, so she dried them off on the towel. Now that's how everything was, Phoebe, just like I told you. So I'm back home again, and I'm satisfied to be here. I done been to the horizon and back now, and I can set here in my house and live by comparisons. This house ain't so absent of things like it used to be before Tea-Cake came along. It's full of thoughts, especially that bedroom. I know all them sitters and talkers are going to worry their guts into fiddle strings till they find out what we've been talking about. That's all right, Phoebe. Tell them. They're going to make admiration because my love didn't work like they love, if they ever had any. And you must tell them that love ain't something like a grindstone. It's the same thing everywhere and does the same thing to everything it touches. Love is like the sea. It's a moving thing, but still in all, it takes its shape from the shore it meets, and it's different with every shore. Lord, Phoebe breathed out heavily. I done growed 10 feet higher from just listening to you, Janie. I ain't satisfied with myself no more. I means to make Sam take me fishing with him after this. Nobody better not criticize ya in my hearing. Now, Phoebe, don't feel too mean with the rest of them because they parched up from not knowing things. The meat skins. That's a fantastic way to describe people, the meat skins. is got to rattle to make them feel alive. Let them console themselves with talk. Of course, talking don't amount to a hill of beans when you can't do nothing else. And listening to that talk is just like opening your mouth and letting the moonshine down your throat. Okay, moonshine here is two words. I'm pretty sure that the alcohol moonshine is one word, so I'm not sure if she actually means like the alcohol or if she means like sunshine moonshine. Could be, could also not be. It's a known fact. Phoebe, you got to go there to know there. Your papa and your mama and nobody else can tell you and show you. Two things everybody got to find out for themselves. They got to go to God, and they got to find out about living for themselves. There was a finished silence after that, for the first time, so they could hear the wind picking at the pine trees. It made Phoebe think of her husband waiting for her and getting fretful. It made Janie think about that room upstairs, her bedroom. Phoebe hugged Janie real hard and cut the darkness in flight. Soon everything around downstairs was shut and fastened. Janie mounted the steps with a lamp. The light in her hand was like a spark of sun stuff washing her face in fire. Her shadow behind fell black and headlong down the stairs. Now in her room the place tasted fresh again. The wind through the open windows had broomed out all of the fetid feelings of absence and nothingness. She closed it and sat down, combing road dust out of her hair, thinking. The day of the gun and the bloody body in the courthouse came and commenced to sing a sobbing sigh out of every corner in the room, out of each and every chair and thing. Commenced to sing, commenced to sob and sigh, singing and sobbing. Then Tea Cake came prancing around her where she was, and the song of the sigh flew out of the window and lit in the top of the pine trees. Tea Cake with the sun for a shawl. Of course he wasn't dead. He could never be dead till she herself had finished thinking and feeling. The kiss of his memory made pictures of love and light on the wall. Here was peace. She pulled in her horizon like a great fishnet, pulled it in from the waste of the world and draped it over her shoulder. So much of life in its meshes, she called in her soul to come and see. So, uh, we had like 2 days of class discussion about this ending, and I've revised what I said earlier. We do indeed have hope for Janie. She says two things everybody got to do for themselves. They got to go to God and they got to find out about living for themselves. I'm interpreting that to mean living for themselves as being independent, not being codependent on somebody else, and you need to take care of yourself and not deal with people who are total jerks to you. And the fact that she's sitting down and thinking so much about the day of the gun and the bloody body and the courthouse, and she's like, at last she's breaking down into tears. This is different from Jodi's death, when she starched and ironed her face, didn't really cry, just kind of moved on, did her thing. Here she seems like genuinely upset. Probably because she had to shoot the man that she loved in the chest, even though he was an abusive asshole. That's got to take the starch out of anybody. Then, of course, he could never be dead till she herself had finished thinking and feeling. So at this point, he's living rent-free in her head. She needs to process stuff. She pulled in her horizon like a great fishnet, pulled it from the waste of the world and draped it over her shoulder. So much of life in its meshes. She called in her soul to come and see. So earlier in the book, I think it's in like chapter 6-ish, Janie is talking about how angry she is at her grandmother, who was the one who raised her. She's upset because her grandmother took the horizon and wrapped it around Janie's neck, choking her, something to that extent. The grandmother didn't actually choke Janie with the horizon or anything else, but Janie felt like the grandmother pushing her to get married in an arranged marriage and telling her that love was going to come eventually, so on and so forth. All of that was just strangling Janie and really putting her in this bad situation. And now, instead of it being around her neck like a restrictive device, she's draped it over her shoulder, so it's more like a cape. So much of life in its meshes. She called her soul to come and see. So at this point in time, Hurston is referring to an extended metaphor that she set up much earlier in the book. when back when Janie was in the like incredibly functional relationship with Jody. It describes her soul hiding and not wanting to come out. And now Janie calls her soul to come in and see. So it's like she's inviting herself to not be afraid anymore, to step out, and to be okay. So even though it's dark now, like it's physically dark, it's nighttime now. Janie is on the road to recovery. She's not completely there yet because he could never be dead until she herself finished thinking and feeling. The kiss of his memory made pictures of love and light on the wall. In the most indelicate but brutally honest of ways, there is no such thing as the kiss of a memory of a domestic abuser making pictures of love and light on the wall and it being a sign of health. There's such a thing as them making pictures of horror and awfulness on the wall. Here was peace. No, peace is not there when you're thinking about such a thing. It's not conducive to mental health at all. But in terms of her letting herself take a breath and start to heal, yes, now there is peace. So I guess that's my picked apart analysis for Their Eyes Were Watching God. Another theme that I noticed, besides the abusive relationship and the food imagery, which to me just seemed the most obvious things, was the theme of loss and abandonment. Janie is a third. No, okay. Yes, Janie is a third generation rape victim. She was raised by her grandmother because her mother just was not involved in the picture at all. We never meet the mother, we only hear about the mother from Janie's grandmother. So I assert that because the mother wasn't there, Janie was not able to form the healthy emotional bond or attachment to her mother. Janie was just able to form a semblance of that with her grandmother. But when her grandmother died, what little trust she had in people was broken. Janie doesn't really connect emotionally with too many people. Tea Cake is able to connect with her emotionally, so we see some of that there. Her first husband uses her as a workhorse. Her second husband uses her as an ornament, and her third husband uses her as a crutch to prop up his masculinity. So, she's not able to form healthy attachments because of the abandonment issues from her mother. One of the assignments that I had for this class was to write. No, this is not English 210. Was to write like an 8-page paper on this, and so I wrote about human sexuality, specifically the sexual abuse of slave men, and then about the family dynamics between slave mothers who were raped and had children, and then what happened to the children. The children were frequently sold out right from underneath them, etc. Absolutely awful, unacceptable, unexcusable behavior. But sorry, I'm looking for the section in my paper where, here we go. Okay. Janie's distance from her birth mother is unusual for Black families at this time. Black families were close even when the family consisted of a birth mother and her rape-conceived children. There's sources for that in my paper. I'll probably do the MLA source to it down below in the description box if I get a chance to do that after I'm done here. Because of her family's complicated sexual history, Janie had to grow up without her mother. This led to feelings of abandonment and stopped Janie from being able to bond with anyone, including her grandmother. Without a mother-daughter bond, Janie isn't able to trust another human. The only person she comes close to trusting is her grandmother. But when her grandmother dies, Janie feels abandoned and betrayed. The lack of bonding with Janie's mother set her up to be abused. Janie's abused by all three of her husbands. Despite the beautiful poetic language of narration, Hurston does not mention Janie bonding with her husbands at all. She's drawn to the idea of love, courtship, marriage, and dating, but she does not really bond with her husbands. Then I go on and say more of the stuff that I said earlier. The lens Janie viewed the world with when she was under the pear tree back in like chapter 1, 2-ish was idyllic and beautiful. When she suffered the traumas of being physically beaten by her husbands, being emotionally manipulated by her husbands, and being financially taken advantage of by her husbands, her lens changed and she viewed the world through her trauma. Her inability to bond and trust manifested itself most strongly when she shot her third husband, Tea Cake. Instead of removing the gun she discovered in his room or completely unloading it, Janie chose to leave him 3 bullets. It was after the second shot that she fired her own gun, killing him on impact. My professor commented that this was a very unconventional interpretation of their eyes that were watching God. Normally, people would say that Janie's relationship with her third husband, Tea Cake, was when she finally found love. And it's like, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm right and everybody else is wrong, but I am saying, what is everybody else on, and did we read the same book? You cannot have a good understanding of love when you're in an abusive relationship, unless you're going to take the analytical route of this is not what love looks like. Drove me mad. So that was the first book that we read. I'll do another live stream tomorrow wherein I analyze the second book that we had to read for this class, Kaukalia Yang's The Late Homecomer. I loved it. I got the opportunity to see her when she came to speak at a local college. You can call it local. So I got a chance to go and hear her, and she was absolutely wonderful, and I got to speak with her afterwards. I felt kind of rude because I was taking notes on my cell phone as fast as I could, trying to transcribe everything that she said, because it was so wonderful and warm and welcoming and really inspirational. So, yes. All right. I guess I'm finished with this live stream. Thanks, Mum and Brianna, for tuning in. I guess I will see y'all tomorrow.